We are about to embark upon a series of strange and exciting, dangerous adventures. Adventures that will lead us to all parts of the world.
Hello and welcome to another Bad Comic Review. This time we are looking at Detective Comics issue 27. This is from the 1937 series, and it's also the first appearance of Batman. Now this is the 2023 Facsimile edition, although it is not exactly 100% a copy, because as you can tell on the cover, where the pipe is coming up, under the left part of Batman's cape, you can see a pipe that's coming up. There's supposed to be part of a building right there. Also, the 10-cent cover price is obviously gone, and a UPC code has been added. Also on the back cover, an address was removed from the Johnson Smith and Company ad. Beyond that, they left quite a bit in here that would be way more offensive. The Batman story is the first one, and it's only about 6 pages long, which for a character is pretty short time to sell somebody on him. Bob Kane is credited with creating the Batman in here, even though Bill Finger did quite a bit of the inventions and gadgets and villains that were created. Now, we don't see too much of that stuff in here. It's just Batman breaking up some burglars, and he's not even driving a Batmobile that hasn't been invented yet, but he does rescue somebody from a death trap, which was kind of cool. I'm really surprised that with this being the first appearance of Batman, that the character lasted too long. There's just not a lot to this story. It's a very simplistic one, but it does have something that a lot of stories later on would attribute with the Joker, and that is somebody falling into a vat of chemicals at Apex Chemical Corporation. Batman did sort of kill people back then, so he often was pictured with a gun, which he doesn't have in this story, and the revelation of his secret identity is just quickly added on at the end. I don't know if they expected this to go very far as a character, but his costume does look cool, and overall the art's okay. It's a much different style. It's definitely the 1930s style of art, which occasionally looks a little rigid, and there's often a lot of lack of background detailing that you see nowadays with people that could easily add background detailing. They're not on the same tight deadlines that these creators were. Commissioner Gordon also looks significantly different. He's got a thinner mustache, and he always looks old, whereas the current mythology of Batman has the two meeting when Gordon was actually a captain. Then there's the Tenderfoot story, which is just a short, silly, throwaway comic strip, effectively. Then we get Speed Saunders, Ace Investigator, and the Killers of Kurdistan by Fred Gardner. And this one is definitely much more true crime, but the crime is hyper simplistic. We've got this red crescent that gives away who did what and how there's a gang of crooks. Well, the revelation of who it is really fast, because this is another very short story. All of them are. They're 6 to 8 pages for the most part, and this one has some really creepy art in it because the woman in the story looks really weird. And it was just a bit of a silly story. Buck Marshall, Range Detective by H. Fleming is next, and this one is a largely pink and somewhat red with black and white story about some shenanigans on a ranch and a killing, and Buck has to solve it. He does so in the hyper expedient way that these stories do, and it was okay. I mean, as a kid, I probably would have liked it because I wouldn't have noticed the logic problems in it, but it was an okay story. Then there's Spy by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, where some people are being murdered by poison, but thankfully our hero Bart figures out who did it, even though he gets captured and is almost subjected to the same fate. Then we've got The Crimson Avenger by Jim Chambers. Now, unlike the other ones, which have hyper simplistic art, which are much more newspaper strip cartoon art, with maybe the exception of the Buck Marshall one, this one has a lot more use of shadows and darkness, which actually makes it look a lot better. And here we have the Crimson Shadow trying to stop some gamblers. I thought this one was pretty good. His sort of serape slash cloak really would be a greater hindrance than help, but it was okay. Death on the Airwaves by Paul Dean is a short story that's only 2 pages long, and I didn't really care for it. It's kind of dumb. Bruce Nelson was in here as well by Tom Hickey. It had a similar kind of theme to it, a mystery that gets solved really quickly by guys with 4-color art. And this one involves voodoo, and it's a bit overly simplistic rendition of voodoo, although one of the guys almost succumbs to gas. This one is continued to next issue, which probably will never be reprinted, but it actually had a pretty good storyline. And the fact that it continued into the next issue is kind of a big selling point because most of these are wrapped up in one issue. But I liked that story overall, even if it is a little bit simplistic. These were aimed at much younger audiences, though. The Mysterious Doctor Fu Manchu by Sax Rohmer really plays into the yellow peril concept, and all of the Chinese people in it are drawn very hideously and monstrous. But this is not a comic book in the traditional sense. It's more like how the newspapers would do serialized stories. So there's no caption bubbles. There's just text kind of glued into one corner of the storyline. And the art is pretty good for what it is, but it is probably considered highly racist by today's standards. And the dog looks weird in it. But like I said, all the Asians are drawn to be caricatures and very subhuman. And that one is also continued to the next issue. We've got Flatfoot Flannigan next by Gustafson, and that is just another silly strip. A lot of these don't make a lot of sense within the context of the theme of the book. You've got a western, you've got a short story, you've got these sort of yellow peril serializations, and then you've got other detective stories. They don't really flow together very well. It's just sort of wedged in there to fill space. You've also got Cosmo, the Phantom of Disguise, illustrated by Sven Elvin, and this one is probably the most racially charged of them. The way people speak is very stereotypical and way worse than any Charlie Chan movie. The main character, Cosmo, goes on in disguise as a Chinese person, and it gets really kind of messy. The Chinese are sneaking people in to the country illegally, and the dialogue is really, really, really bad. I can see what they were going for, but by today's standards, this would never get printed. Plainclothes Pete is next, and that's written by Alger, and that one again has very cartoon style art that you would see in a newspaper, and the story was just these two guys trying to find a crook. It was really bad. I was bored with that. Slam Bradley is the last story, and that is by Siegel and Shuster as well. Slam Bradley was pretty popular at the time, and he is trying to bust up some bad guys, and he has to go to the mountains for that. And of course, he gets himself and his weird-looking sidekick captured, but not much can stop Slam Bradley, and he quickly turns the tables on the bad guys in a fairly ludicrous method. But overall, it was okay too. A lot of these stories were just okay, but if you're a kid and you're reading this and you don't have access to the internet or anything like that, these would have been just fine. Younger readers don't have a lot of worldly experience, so they're gonna kind of just go with the story. I'm a little surprised that the Batman story was fairly weak, actually. It was okay considering, and as a kid I would have liked it. I probably would have liked the Speed Saunders one too, and the Crimson Avenger, but overall probably the best story was Bruce Nelson. The Cosmo one would have been pretty good, but it is really, really racially charged. And same with the Fu Manchu story. So the art is a pretty mixed bag. Quite a bit of the art looks like what you would see in a newspaper strip, and that was kind of the style of the time. The fact this is in 4-color though really probably did help it quite a bit, but some of the art is pretty solid. It's just a very mixed bag of varying styles. So I will recommend reading it just because of the historical artifact nature of it. It does come at $7, but for being able to read Batman's first appearance, I would say it's worth it. You also get all the other stories that came with it, which are really hard to find. Finding a complete reprint of this issue was very, very difficult for a very long time. If you were lucky, you were able to find one, but most people aren't going to be able to afford the original by any stretch of the imagination. So if you ever want to read this, drop the $7 to $10 you're likely to pay for it and check out one of these facsimile editions. They're definitely worth it. You get to read all the letters and the ads and things like that. I really like the facsimiles, especially because some of these books I would never be able to read, and it's nice to read all the other stories from that era, especially because some of them are really spicy by today's standards. So I'm gonna recommend this, even though I found the Batman story to be kind of weak. The cover is really cool too. I would prefer if they had stuck a little more closely to the original and not edited a little bit out for no apparent reason, but it was nice to at least see this the way they presented it. That's gonna do it for this one though. Thank you so much for listening and supporting the channel. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future reviews. If you'd like to help the channel out in other ways, links are in the description to various support methods, and as always, we hope to see you on the next one.